The Beijing Xiangshan Forum, a fool's errand, hypocrisy on full display. The 11th Beijing Xiangshan Forum started on September 12, 2024, for its three-day annual meeting. The Beijing International Convention Center hosted the forum under the theme Promoting Peace for a Shared Future. The forum was attended by 90 countries and international organizations, including the United States, which is sending Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Michael Chase to lead the U.S. delegation. The conference's focus will be on security cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region, multipolarity and the international order, the global south, and global security governance. The Xingshan Forum is meant to counter the annual Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, which China has criticized for supporting the West worldview. It aims to counter this by offering a Chinese-centric perspective on the global order. The conference attendees included Russia, which is a close ally of China, which has been providing significant support to Russia in its war in Ukraine. In support of the Chinese anti-Western focus on the conference, Chinese Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Fomin stated that, quote, Russia and China support the creation of a just, multipolar world based on equality and mutual respect, end quote. Mr. Fomin continued by accusing the NATO countries of attempting to impose peace on Ukraine's terms and planning to send troops to Ukraine to force the Russian withdrawal and restore the 1991 post-Soviet borders. The Russians were not alone in their criticism about the Western order of the world when Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun told the attendees that, quote, major countries must take the lead in safeguarding global security, abandon a zero-sum mindset, and refrain from bullying the small and the weak, end quote, in an apparent critique of the United States. Both Russia and its key ally, China's statements, is full of irony given that the nuclear-armed Russia is currently engaged in a war with a smaller Ukraine and routinely threatens countries in the region that support Ukraine in its war, which includes increasingly common nuclear threats. China, for its part, has illegally claimed the South China Sea as its own and is in inconsistent, low-intensity clashes and standoffs with the Philippines, India, Vietnam, and Japan over which states are violations of China's sovereignty or the more dangerous situation over the Taiwan question. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's demands are essentially a zero-sum scenario. China and Russia criticized with some justification that the United States and its interventionist policies, which include U.S. military actions in the Middle East and Africa. However, China and Russia are presenting only delusional propaganda, portraying themselves as the morally superior and striving to establish a just world. The primary focus of the Chinese and Russians is to establish a bipolar world rather than a stated multipolar one, with the aim of undermining the current global order. The West refers to this as a rules-based order, which the Chinese and Russians perceive and present to the world to be rules imposed on the world by Western-backed institutions. The Chinese and Russians aim to introduce an alternative and competitive approach to the West. This includes BRICS, the end of the petrodollar, and reforming the international and monetary system, and to move away from the use of the US dollars, the Eurozone euros, and the Japanese yens for international trade to the use of a proposed BRIC currency or national currencies. This means that BRICS would need to become an economic union similar to the Eurozone. This does not imply that China and Russia are on the verge of establishing a new currency or replacing the dollar as the global reserve currency, but it illustrates that despite their professed desire for a multipolar world, the supporters of this vision merely employ idealistic rhetoric. The aim is to establish a rival system to the current Western rules-based order, and despite the rhetoric from the Chinese, multipolarity is not a serious attempt. The question remains, can the Chinese, with their economic stature, and the Russians, with their military power, industry, and the ties to the developing world, create an effective union to rival the West? The BRICS alliance, comprising of diverse rivals such as China and India, Iran, and Egypt as current members, and the potential future candidates like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Sudan, Vietnam, and Pakistan raises the question of its long term effectiveness. Are numerous current rivals prepared to put aside their differences to form a unified union, or are they ceding some of their autonomy to China and Russia, who are the dominant powers with a history of manipulating regulations for their own benefit? One can justifiably accuse the West of similar actions, yet its institutions operate based on a shared political and economic principles rather than fostering a rival system based on us versus them mentality that is much less durable over time. China and its allies reduced the Xiangshan Forum to a tool for attacking the current world order, despite its rhetorical goals. In modern history, the world has undergone a series of shifting alliances. Therefore, the calls made by the Chinese in general and the Forum in particular are not a new development in the world history, but rather a continuation of the global situation that briefly paused following the Cold War. The Chinese and Russian axis, as well as the West, are taking the position of rivalry, which can often lead to a world of tension and conflict. A truly different approach would involve the difficult work of finding a path forward towards cooperation and a willingness to compromise within the current global system to avoid conflict and to resolve conflict when it does occur. Instead of forcing one's country's will on another, we should develop a common set of rules and respect for other nations, which would be more effective than the UN or the League of Nations, ineffective bureaucracies. Perhaps we should pursue institutions that embraces the nation state rather than attempting to subserve them to a bureaucratic organization, and to establish an organization that fosters cooperation rather than imposing the will of the majority or a small subset of states that hold veto power over any decision that is presented to them. The think small approach emanating from Beijing's forum this week indicates their desire to establish a zero-sum game under their leadership and to provide no novel approaches to international diplomacy or cooperation, much as so many alliances have been in the past.